Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here tonight. I want to thank all of you for joining, and I hope that you're familiar with the Zoom format. If you are not, there is a chat feature that will allow you to ask questions along the way, and we will have a period of question and answer at the end of our session where you can ask any questions you'd like about the selective college admission process in the US. It doesn't have to be limited to essays, although that's what our presentation will be about tonight. So please feel free to type your questions into the chat box as they come up, and Lei will be monitoring and will translate as necessary. I do not, unfortunately, speak Mandarin, although I definitely need to learn it because I have two grandchildren who are half Chinese. So I need to learn it, but he will help me tonight as necessary. Okay. So we'll just get started. And he's already introduced me a little bit, but I have been in college admissions since 1988. And at that time, I had graduated from Princeton and we got a new dean of admission, and he called me up and recruited me to come work as an admission officer. And I did have a wonderful 3 years there before we moved away, and I wasn't able to continue doing that. Um, but I did go to the other side of the desk and ended up working in a high school. And I've actually been with Interface as a special advisor and a counselor for over a decade now. And I think very highly of the company. But today I want to share with you some knowledge about the actual essay writing process, which is such an important part of the college application process in the US. And I'd like to explain a little bit about how it works and what it is that they're doing. If you do not have a child who is a senior, most of you probably don't, but if you have a child who has gone through this process, then you know this is the time of year we are very hot and heavy into the essay writing process. So at this moment, admission to US colleges involves submitting grades, possibly test scores, and then a bunch of essays. And I think the question is, what do these essays do? What is it that these essays do? So if you'll give us the next slide, essays bring a student to life. Understand that there are thousands of students who have similar tests and test scores and grades. What makes this student with a perfect transcript different from the next student with a perfect transcript? It is the essays that bring the student to life. My dean of admission at Princeton, who is a very famous dean of admission, used to say that at best, a college application is a compromise, and it's probably a bad compromise between what a student can reasonably be expected to complete for a set of colleges and what a staff of human beings can reasonably be expected to review with some attention in a limited amount of time. So these essays are a substitute for knowing the student as a person, in a way, making a personal impression. No college admission office is telling you that they can know your child as well as your school, your high school knows your child, or as well as you know your child. That is a complete myth, and I can't think of a single admission person who would pretend that that is what they're trying to do. But the essays bring the student to life. They make a personal impression, and they show how a student is different from others who really have similar grades and test scores. First, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the personal statement. If you'll go to the next one. Oh, sorry. Yes, no, you can go to the next one. The writing that's done in college applications, people often ask us, well, I'm good at my English literature papers. I'm good at writing history papers. Is this like that? And the answer is emphatically no. Most students have been trained to be academic writers, but that is not what this writing is. Okay, let me explain this. College essay prompts, the questions that they ask, can be a little bit deceptive. I don't think that an admission staff is trying to trick a student. They are friendly, they believe very strongly in what they're doing, and they like this age group. But they ask them friendly questions. Tell me about yourself. Share with me your life experiences. What experiences have you had in engineering or whatever you want to major in? They pose as sympathetic audiences and they invite you to share. But then they read these essays and they use what you have written to accept you or deny you for admission. And again, I do think there's a lot of goodwill in this whole process. But as families, we need to understand that this is a competitive writing exercise. And it's more like a job interview than some kind of foot race or athletic event where the strongest person wins. I think most parents have been through job searches and they understand the idea that you can have more qualified applicants for each job, more attractive applicants that you would like to work with for each job than you can actually offer that job to. I can make one job offer, but I might have loved 5 applicants and I might have had 500. So these essays, this is your field of competition. What you've done over, what students do over their high school years, ninth, 10th, 11th, 12th grade, that takes a long time to do. It takes a long time to make good grades. It takes a shorter time to study for those tests and to take them and do well and improve than the shortest time. And some of the most important time is to do the right job on these essays. The right kind of writing that makes an emotional connection with your reader, that motivates them to want you in their community, to want to hire you for their college. So let's move on to the next slide, please. So what should these essays show about me? What should I be trying to show in these essays? They are looking for things that are significant about your personal growth or what you value, the things you might believe, the hopes that you have for the future. They certainly ask for future plans sometimes. The past experiences that you've had and how they have shaped your thought processes. They are asking, what has this particular young person done with the opportunities that they've had in life? And all of our children, all of these students have had different opportunities, and some of them have had harder paths than others. There's an athletic competition, which I'm sure you're familiar with, the diving competition. And one of the parts of the score of how well you dive into the water is how difficult the dive was. If you do a simple swan dive and you just dive straight into the water, that's not very hard. And you might have done it perfectly, but it wasn't very hard. So if you do a complicated dive with flips and twists and turns and you do it perfectly, then that gets a higher score. And I think that is the parallel you need to think about here. The experiences and opportunities that your child may have had in life, what have they done with them? How have they shown initiative, maximized their opportunities? And has it been more difficult for some students than others? And have they managed to do, in the face of difficulty, what other students might have done with ease because they did not have the same difficulty? So that's important to keep in mind. They are also looking for the ability to make unusual connections or observations about people, the things they've learned, the values they have. They're not looking for common lessons. So, for example, if a student wants to write about raising money and providing a library for a rural school in China, and they visited that school and delivered the books, and they learned, gee, people who are poor can be happy too. That is probably the most common lesson to learn in that situation. So what's an uncommon lesson? What is the second or third thought that comes to their mind for a lesson that they might have learned about that situation. Your essay should also show the student's brain, their intelligence, and their heart. This is something that I think is probably pretty unique to US admissions. They are looking for emotional maturity. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that, but students who are able to show emotional maturity do very well in this process. The goal, once an admission officer reads an essay, is to be able to list as many adjectives about that writer as possible. So when I read applications, I would summarize an essay, not what it said, but what I learned about the person. I might say, remarkably perceptive about the motivations of peers and adults. Something like that, that captures a personal characteristic about this student. One of the problems with adults or someone else writing an essay for a student is that that message doesn't come through usually. The voice is confused. And it sounds like a 50-year-old man wrote this, not a 17-year-old young man. So it comes through very clearly to readers who read thousands of these a year that perhaps this is just not, I can't get a feel for who this is behind the words. And maybe it's been, not written by the student in an authentic way. So we can move on to the next one, please. The primary, I am going to talk about what's on this slide in just a minute, but I will mention that the primary essay for the Common Application, which we use here, is a 650-word personal statement. And the guidelines that I've just talked about, the goals, would apply very much to that personal statement. Then each college has their own supplemental essays they may ask for. So I'm not sure exactly how much you know about the application itself, but most colleges use something called the Common Application. And you can think of it as a tree with branches. The tree trunk would be the basic Common Application that every college gets or receives. It includes the name, address, parents' name, emails, boilerplate information like where do you go to high school and does your school rank and how do they do your GPA? And then it would include that personal statement. The branches of the tree are the individual colleges that ask what they want to ask, their own questions. So if I am Cornell, I may ask very different questions than, say, Davidson, one of the top 10 liberal arts colleges, would ask. And a college asks questions because for them, those questions are bringing forth essays that help them tell the difference between students who have similar credentials. They are trying to distinguish between different students that are at similar academic levels. So we have identified what I sometimes call them root essays or basic essays, the themes of which you will see over and over in the branches of the tree in the individual college questions. First would be academic or intellectual interest essays. And what we've got here are several examples from colleges about how they might ask this type of question. What attracts you to this area of study? This engineering prompt for Princeton is very funny. I wrote that prompt a long time ago, and they are still asking the roots of this. Why are you interested in studying engineering at our school, at Princeton? Include any of your experiences in or exposure to engineering and how you think the programs here will suit your interests. So for engineers, there are many students who are simply good at math and science, and therefore the adults in their life have said, oh, you should be an engineer. Well, that might work at some schools, at I would say maybe broader, less selective state schools, but that does not a Princeton engineer make. Just simple interest in math and science. You actually need to know a little bit about what you're talking about if you say, I want to be in your engineering school. We could go on to the next slide. So why does an admission office ask these particular questions, the academic interest? First of all, they do want to actually judge the student's intellectual ability. How does their brain engage with a topic that they love? How smart are they? They also want to judge the student's past experience with potential majors, right? Are they making an informed decision about choosing computer science or history? Are they really going to stay in this major? Most students do change their major. But when someone sits you down for a job interview and says, why would you like to work at my company? You want to at least have thought it out and have an answer for why you want to work for that company in that particular department. Things may change in the future, but you'd better be smart enough to put into words why you want to work for that company in particular, in that role in particular. So this is the exercise that the essay is going through. Have you thought this through? The next point, how well have you researched this potential major at this college, and how are you going to take advantage of my opportunities? I have read essays before where someone talks about wanting to major in business at Princeton. There's an automatic reject. Princeton doesn't have a business major, doesn't have a business school. It's someone who's just going for the name, right? The name of the college. They want to judge whether the student's abilities in this academic area are in line with the level that is typical for students at this particular college. I was working with a lovely young lady once who had taken a high-level physics course, and she was good at math, not unusual, but good. And she really liked the concepts in physics, and she wanted to major in physics. And I had to tell her, you can major in physics. You can major in physics at these universities, but you are not a Princeton physics major because that's not what they look like. So is the student, who's saying they want to major in physics or math at Harvard, are they really at the level of my math majors at Harvard? They're going to judge that. They also want to evaluate, finally, passion and excitement for learning. So love of learning is actually one of the things that at Interface we try to develop in students in their freshman and sophomore years. If we don't see a love of learning, that's really important to dig until we find that, because it's really important to love learning. We can go on to the next one. Another very common kind of essay is to ask about extracurricular activities. And these are usually fairly straightforward, briefly elaborate on one of these activities. And I think sometimes what students misunderstand is that they're actually not asking you to just say, here's my resume entry about this particular activity. I hold this role at school and I do these things. They're interested in something else. So let's go to the next slide and talk about, what are they interested in? Why? Why are they asking this? They don't care what you do. They don't care what the activity is. They want to see what you value enough that you're going to spend your time on it. Okay? I don't care if you study baseball statistics. Why do you love statistics about sports? Is it because you have a math mind or you love data analysis and computers and you actually, what's going on here? What do you value that expresses itself through this activity? Now, that's going to reveal personal characteristics, right? Is this a compassionate person? Do they have empathy, or how do they lead? And again, the admission office is not looking for specific personal qualities. They are looking for your child's personal qualities and how they are revealed through this activity. They are interested very much, I would say, in personal interaction with other people, team, right? How do they operate in a project group or on a team? And is there leadership or following, and how do they interact with a group? Because one of the very important aspects of being admitted to a college is how you interact in the dorms, because most of them are going to be living there, and how do you interact in the classrooms. And I want people for my college who are going to have a good dynamic with other people on teams. Okay. So the actual activity doesn't matter. It's just a lens through which the student should show a few of their personal characteristics and values. So we can move on to the next one. Thank you. This particular category has been changing a little bit over the past few years, but we can call it a community and diversity essay. And these are just some examples. I think I may have even a second slide on that, but we all contribute to and are influenced by the communities that are meaningful to us. Share how you've been shaped by one of the communities you belong to. Define community any way that's most meaningful to you. It could be your family, school, workplace, an activity, interest, any group you belong to. I do think I have another slide on this one, Caroline, if you could go to the next. Oh, okay. Well, I don't have another example, but the goals. They are asking how this student will cope with being in probably the most diverse environment they have ever been in. American universities are racially diverse. They are socioeconomically diverse. Princeton has over 22% of their students are from impoverished, truly impoverished backgrounds, right? They are from all over the world. The world just beats a path to American higher education at this point. 15% of your student body, maybe more, might be from all over the world. And so, how is this person going to do when they are dropped into the middle of the most diverse environment that they've ever been in? And how sheltered have they been from people who are not like themselves? Sometimes I'll see a student will write in an essay, I want to be with like-minded peers. I want to be with people who think the way that I do, with curiosity, intellectually, and hunger for academics. Usually that's what they're saying. But I always strip it out. I say, look, they're not looking for people who want to be with like-minded peers. They're looking for people who are comfortable with people who are not like them. So another goal of this kind of essay is to understand, who do you identify with, and why? And then also to find out what perspectives have been formed by this student's experiences. I had one student who wrote an essay on this, and ultimately we used it for 14 colleges, which is a high number, with some adjustments. But she had been a documentary filmmaker, and amateur documentary filmmaker, and she did this with 4 or 5 of her best friends, and they would take turns making the documentary of one member of this group, and then they would make the documentary for another member of the group. And so sometimes you were the director of the documentary, you were the leader, it was your vision and your interest. And sometimes you were just filming and helping to execute, editing, doing the work to support that other person. And she wrote about this little group and how her perspective had been shaped. That all of their different opinions about the topic of the documentary really made her learn more, examine more the subject matter, that she was interested in filming. So they're looking for, how do you learn from and with other people, if that makes sense. I do want to encourage, I'm going to take a pause right here. I do want to encourage you to be thinking about your questions. And I appreciate that you're, being quiet right now, but I do want you to be thinking about them and go ahead and if you need to type anything into the chat box, please go ahead. So let's go on to the next category of common essays. Why this college? Here are a few examples. Brown University, one of the Ivies, has a particular approach called an open curriculum, which means that they don't have the same kinds of requirements that a lot of other colleges have that guide the course of study. Brown students have very uh, broad latitude to choose their own courses. So they ask, how might you pursue an academic interest at Brown? You can take English literature anywhere. You can take civil engineering anywhere. Why Brown? And because they've brought up the open curriculum, they're expecting you to address that. They also mention reflecting where you came from. How has an aspect of your growing up inspired or challenged you? And what unique contributions would this enable you to make to the Brown community? In one sentence, they say, why Brown? So let's move on. Dartmouth says, it's very broad. What aspects of the college's academic program, so it could be academic, community, could just be the community group, or campus, attract your interest? How is Dartmouth a good fit for you? So Dartmouth is saying, we don't care if you talk about academics or the perceived community and student body here or our campus facilities and all of that. How do we fit with you? We can go on now. So what's the goal? Again, examining how much research the student has done on this college in order to understand how much real interest they have in attending, and to weed out students who have only superficial reasons for attending. I often explain to people that the Ivy League is a sports league. It happens to be a sports league that includes some of the older colleges because they wanted to play sports against each other and they were the only colleges. So they formed a sports league. And I would argue that there are many schools that are better than some of the Ivies that are not part of the Ivy League. But you will see students who feel that they should apply to Harvard and Dartmouth and Yale and Princeton. And what that says to a counselor and to someone who understands the differences between these schools, it says you want to attend a high reputation, high ranking Ivy League school. That's admirable, but you don't understand how they're different. You don't know how Princeton and Dartmouth are completely different from the rest of the Ivies, right? So they're evaluating with these questions. How well do you understand our atmosphere, our opportunities, and then how do you envision yourself participating in our school? What do you expect to contribute to? They want to see how the student fits with the school. And a lot of colleges say this is actually the most important essay, more important than the personal statement, for example. We have also seen, yes, you can put that one up. We've also seen a different topic, what I call a root essay, a common topic come up this year. And we're calling it the difficult conversation. Harvard says, describe a time when you strongly disagreed with someone about an idea or an issue. How did you communicate or engage? What did you learn? I'm sure most of you, yes, here's some more. I'll let you read those. I'm sure you're aware that we've had difficult public discourse and conversation in this country over the last couple of years. Excuse me. And colleges are starting to ask, how are you going to get along when you don't agree? And they're asking people to explain how they have handled disagreement. Excuse me. I apologize. I am getting over a cough. So if I start coughing, I apologize. So they want to know, and you can move on to the admission goals. I'm going to let you read that while I get a cough drop. I apologize. How are students going to relate to people who disagree with them? How are they going to handle possible clashes of opinion, with people on my campus? They are absolutely looking for open-mindedness, okay? And they definitely want to weed out people who are dogmatic or entrenched in their opinions and their mindsets, whether they are, liberal or conservative. Um, I had one young lady who many years ago wrote about her community of friends. And one of the things that she said in her essay was she described how they would get together every weekend and they would debate and talk and she basically had a line in there that said, I can't think of a better way to spend a Saturday night than arguing with my friends and having my mind changed. You admit a student for that line. So now don't go writing it in every essay. But the point is, they are looking for open-mindedness, people who are secure enough in who they are to have an opinion, but to also know how to deal with people who do not agree. They want to build a community on campus that can engage in respectful dialogue, even when it's about controversial topics. And it's definitely a response to recent tension on campus that has been centered around different political beliefs and values. Okay. So we're coming up here on the end of the information that I have to give you, but I really do want to answer your questions